Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started then. I think most people have trickled in here by now. So, what this is going to be is kind of a look at ICS from a standpoint of some critiques that have been leveled at it by some of kind of the titans of the disaster science research, and kind of push back at that by thinking, what do we do specifically at Burns that lets us overcome these weak points in ICS? How do we do ICS differently that makes it work so well for us? And how can we further tailor it to the unique strengths of the environment we're working in? So you're going to get two story times for the price of one academic presentation in this whole PowerPoint. And the first one is talking about the 1985 Mexico City earthquake. So what happened in the immediate aftermath of one of the most devastating earthquakes that that region had seen at the time was that the army was put in charge by the federal government of the response, but they were mustering outside the city, had poor lines of communication into the city, and their command and control models were just not working to even to organize their own efforts, much less coordinate with others. However, within the city, Pemex, the National Petroleum Company, run as a direct part of the federal government, had construction equipment in place. They had hundreds of employees in place, and they began search and rescue operations almost immediately using an elaborate structure that just emerged for them very spontaneously. Can I ask everybody to kind of look at your mute settings? This we're not automatically muting when you enter the room for some reason. But as a result, kind of what are the takeaways were the value of what they call, in this case, extending organizations. Organizations that go outside of their normal day-to-day operations, and the way that they function differently than a hierarchical command and control operation like military, or like some aspects of what ICS provides. So dialing it back and looking at the history of disaster science in a nutshell, it's actually a relatively young discipline. It's only really emerged after World War II and came of age in the civil defense era, when it was used to look at natural disasters as laboratories for what the Department of Defense thought would the aftermath of a nuclear attack would look like. And as a result, they were predicting panic, they were predicting mass chaos, the need to exert martial law, to exert control over a panicking population. And the kind of foremost researchers at the time, Enrico Quarantelli, Russell Dines, the Disaster Research Center they founded, their students, and almost all of the major disaster science research since then has found that actually wasn't the case. There was overwhelming pro-social behavior in disasters. That there is a strong tendency of people to come together, neighbors to look out for each other, emergent multi-organizational networks, as we call them, of just neighbors or people in the community assisting each other. So that gets us to kind of what Quarantelli, Dines, and a lot of their peers thought of ICS. And they had kind of a lot not great to say about it. Their complaints were that it forces information to flow up before flowing over, that it can stifle flexibility, it can paralyze those pro-social emergent organizations that we're talking about that would otherwise be more effective were they not kind of being forced into an externally imposed command and control model. And the kind of background for when a lot of these critiques came about was the bulk of these work, despite the fact that Quarantelli and Dines have been writing since the late 50s, a lot of these articles kind of critiquing ICS came about in the Homeland Security era after 2001, when there was a massive reorganization of America's emergency response structures. FEMA was deprioritized and put under DHS. There are kind of a lot of changes that a lot of people, including myself, consider to have kind of hobbled the emergency management as a profession's ability to help people in the event of a natural disaster. And that was about the time when NIMS was rolled out, taking ICS kind of nationwide as the standard. And when I'm saying it stifles flexibility, that really is something that's very necessary. We found over and over again for emergency response. This is I didn't make this up. Semper Gumby is an actual, apparently originates from the Marine Corps. It's most noted today to be used amongst the Coast Guard, but it means always flexible. The most important thing is that you have to be able to adapt. And under the model that Semper Gumby is about, that Always Flexible is about, they empower tip of the spear responders. So in our case, the Dirt Ranger volunteers, the sanctuary listeners, to take initiative and use their best judgment, and to collaborate with each other, to hand information sideways instead of sending it up to go over, as well as just kind of consensus-based decision making. Now, that's not always the best case, and even kind of students of Quarantelli and Dines will argue that the kind of chaotic and rapidly developing nature of a lot of incidents and the hazards in them make ICS the right way to go, because there's just not the time for the lengthy consensus building process that it takes to get kind of voluntary compliance, and to get a lot of people just to make the same decision together and then act on it together. And then there's also been a lot of findings that pre-existing trust between response partners, things that can be built in exercises, things that can be built in prior working conditions under real hazard conditions, that is one of the biggest predictors for successful use of ICS, is whether or not different organizations and different resources who are plugging in with each other, who don't work together on a day-to-day basis, if they have that pre-existing trust, if they've had the opportunity to build it, which I think we do. I think we have a great ability to build that with our community, with teams that may be outside of safety, whether they be side ops or other resources that are available to us. So I think that's one of the places where we're kind of operating within the good side of ICS. And frankly, we bring things to ICS that a lot of natural disaster environments don't. We have a wonderful community that is built around, I mean, I'm sure Caveat or others could argue all 10 principles, some manner of applicability to ICS or to disaster relief, response, recovery, mitigation, et cetera. But I picked out these three as the ones that I see the most direct kind of face value representation: communal effort, civic responsibility, and radical self-reliance. Communal effort as that is the collaboration, that is coming together, that is less hierarchical thinking. We still accept some hierarchies, obviously. Shift supervisors are considered to be more experienced, duty chiefs even more experienced than them, and we defer to their decisions based on that experience and the trust they've earned for themselves. But that also is a function of our community, that coming together to make these decisions, to cooperate, is a part of who we are. Civic responsibility as well. We want to help. I think you're going to find a lot of times the participants want to be part of the solution, whether they're knowledgeable of ICS or not, whether they're in a safety team shirt or not. There is, I think you're going to find on average a greater sense of engagement in our communities and among our participants than you'd find just as an average selection of this country. And finally, radical self-reliance encourages us not to be part of the problem ourselves, at least. Well, you know, that phrase has got a loaded meaning for safety teams, but it also in this sense means taking care of ourselves in a way that we understand the impact that we have on others, other resources, other people, when we fail to do that. I think there is a lot more mindfulness of self-reliance and of the impact that we have on others when we fail to look after our self-reliance than we maybe read at face value all the time. And participants, what they have to offer. So an emergent network is one of the four typologies of one of the four types from the Disaster Research Center typology that occurs spontaneously in a disaster. So you've got established responders, that would be Coast Guard, National Guard, any number of people who are acting in their role, doing what they would normally be doing what they're trained to do in an emergency. That's established. You've also got extending, like I mentioned, PIMEX earlier, who are going outside of their normal roles to function and to contribute something that they wouldn't normally be. You've got expanding, organizations that staff up in emergencies like the Red Cross. And then you've got emergent, which are kind of the hot topic right now for social science research and disasters, is organizations that just spring up spontaneously out of a need and out of compassion and out of common shared interests and values amongst a population and a community. And as a result of that, I really encourage you as a safety personnel, as in a leadership position, in a ranger position, wherever you are, to think of the participants as a resource. We sometimes put a barrier between the way we perceive the resources that we've trained in our system and other participants out on the playa, be it virtual Piney or BlackRock. And burners are really good about pro-social behavior. Burners really do have a common interest and a common desire to build something. And that is, once again, another one of the hot topics in disaster research is looking at community resilience model. More and more emergency managers are beginning to realize that the complete whole health of the community that they serve is going to be part of how well it bounces back after a disaster. It's why emergency managers are realizing that things like racial justice, income justice, all these issues are emergency management issues, because a community that doesn't have that resiliency, that has vulnerabilities based on those factors or any others, is not going to bounce back as quickly or as strongly as one that does. And to that end, I'd encourage us all to play to our burner strengths in an incident. We have a lot of freelancers showing up, and frankly, the convergence is called the second disaster. It can be a problem, but instead of turning them away, let's think about the opportunity to call them in. How can we use freelancers? Obviously not letting them continue to do what they're doing if it's dangerous, if it's disruptive to our efforts. But when someone comes up and really wants to be part of the solution, whether they're in a safety shirt or not, we have the opportunity to say, hey, can you stand over there and hold perimeter for me? Can you perform some other functions? Can you go tell people up and down this path to get out of the way because we're going to need to get an ambulance in? We have a resource in our participants. And I'd really like to push back against in-group, out-group thinking by safety teams. I think this is something that we kind of engage in. At least I've seen a lot of it. Thinking of, whether it's calling participants wooks or kind of bashing some of the metaphysical beliefs. We really need to stop thinking of ourselves as a distinct community within burners and start thinking of ourselves as burners and thinking of what we have in common with all participants. I think once we start to kind of challenge that, we're the safety teams and they're the participants we serve, and start looking at that commonality, That's going to open up a lot of options for us and build a lot of trust that we can use when we need it in incidents. It's also, uh, we value collaborative consensus building. It's something we do well, whether it's on art projects, and there's always going to be a little bit of more bickering than we want with when it comes to a lot of personalities coming together on something. But it is something we do well, is collaborative consensus building. But it's not always the right time for that. And that's something that we need to look for as incident commanders, as operations section chiefs, and in whatever roles we're serving. We need to be asking ourselves, how fast is this hazard evolving and how dangerous is it? Is this a situation where I have the opportunity and the leisure to let volunteers non-hierarchically figure it out while still keeping them in the general constraints of an ICS, letting them collaborate together, pass recommendations up to the IC, pass authorization down back to them? Or is it going so fast that we can't really do that? And we need a little bit more hierarchical approach like ICS has traditionally provided. And I really, really want to encourage you to empower frontline volunteers in the incident response and to take initiative when they need to. This is something we're the experienced, knowledgeable minority of safety teams. I think you'll find, at least in a lot of the events that I work on, that have the background that we do in ICS. And with those frontline volunteers, whether they're once again dirt rangers, sanctuary listeners, they may not have any of their FEMA certs. They may just have their 100. But I wouldn't discount what they have to offer because of that. And I would make sure that they're empowered if they know what they're doing, which sanctuary listeners know how to de-escalate someone. They know how to provide active listening. Rangers know their flame approaches. And when we empower our volunteers to use the skills that they have, that they know, instead of kind of waiting for every micromanaged order from us, I think we're going to get better results. Although this is something where, once again, you need to gauge the danger of the hazard and how rapidly it's expanding. And I want to close this out with the second story of the promised story time. Some of you may have heard this one. This is, I think, almost like a Burner fairy tale. But kind of a description of an elderly a hippie who was working at a for-profit festival. This is one of ours, who's got taken a gig as a roadie or as whatever for a for Coachella, for Bonnaroo, whatever you want to call it. And he's been called along with a lot of staff members there because a participant has climbed up a generator post with a light on top, 20, 30 feet up in the air, and is insisting that he's the Mothman. You've got cops standing there. You've got for-profit paid event organizers standing there, just thinking, how are we going to get him down? Do we get a ladder? What do we do? And just trying and failing to coax this altered participant down from this kind of lamppost. And the old hippie, the burner, the person who is versed in the adaptive thinking that we value and that we've cultivated in our community, unplugs the generator, points his flashlight at the ground, and lures Mothman down. And I think we have those skills. We have a fantastic community, and integrating them more, viewing them as a resource, thinking what we as safety volunteers take from the ethos and the values of that community and melding that with ICS is going to make an ICS that works better for us. And it's going to make an ICS that overcomes the weaknesses that are kind of inherent to it when it's played out, when there isn't that trust, when there isn't that commonality, and when there aren't those shared values. I'll thank you very much for listening. I'll open it up for questions or comments. Looking at chat, and I'm going to be working backwards forwards here. So forgive me if I'm going out of order. But I see Cheese Pants talking about emphasizing flexibility in training, but also emphasizing consent. And I think that's a good point. Knowing when somebody is out of their comfort zone, out of their what they feel that they can handle. And that's something that I think we've been kind of trying to cultivate in our departments. It's knowing, sanctuary listeners know when something is too heavy and when they need to call in their resident experienced expert, as Flipside calls them. I think still their shift supervisor, their section chief, etc. So I would agree with that point, that making sure that the no's of our participants are volunteers, and anybody working with us in an incident are respected. From Sweeney, how do you manage asking volunteers to do something outside their agreed volunteer role? Ask them, and I'd say that ties in with a previous one. You got to respect their no. If they've been given an expectation of what they'll do on a shift, and you're asking them to do something that uses a skill set they haven't been trained in, that exposes them to any kind of hazard that they're not comfortable with, you got to respect their no. No, I muted some people as you came in, just because the settings for this account are somehow toggled that you don't auto mute on entry. If anybody is trying to say something and I've overridden you with the mute, feel free to use the raise your hand reaction function.
You may have said this, but I think the fact that we all know each other probably has an impact on how we're able to go back and forth between being more flexible and less flexible more quickly and easily.
Absolutely. That goes back to the Chang and Trainer article, looking at pre-existing bonds. In the case that they're researching, they're looking at organizations that had conducted exercises together, or been deployed together in different or similar situations, but who don't work together day to day. And their findings were overwhelmingly that that is one of the key factors to making ICS work for that population. Oh, Ginger, to your point, yeah, I think it certainly does help to communicate absolute boundaries, such as not communicating with media. That's something that kind of needs to be in part of your baseline training. But it's also something where if a situation is bad enough, if your resources are not adding up and you need to get participants in there to hold perimeter, or to clear a path for an ambulance, or to do other tasks that we can kind of welcome in untrained participants to do, chances are media contact, while we would like to avoid it, is maybe not the biggest concern at that point. It is when something's escalated and we're kind of being called upon to adapt in that manner. We are at the 2-minute till mark, and the feedback we've kind of been getting consistently over the session, over the last couple of sessions, has been to give you all time to hit the bathroom and the fridge before your next your next course or session. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining me today. Hope you got something out of it. If nothing else, take pride in being a burner and doing ICS better because you're a burner. But I thank you all for joining us. Look forward to seeing you later.